Planar track using Mocha in After Effects, we need to use the Mocha effect. Applying motion tracking using Mocha is slightly different to the usual way where we go up to the tracker panel. In this case, what we do is we go to the effect controls and we apply it as we would apply any other effect. We go to Boris Mocha, Mocha AE. So there's a couple of things here in the effect. We've got the launch button, and then we've got our two sections here, matting and track data. Matte being responsible for masks, tracking data being responsible for four corner pins, and these are going to be used with the data that comes back in from Mocha. So we'll apply the effect in here, and we'll have essentially a corner pin with a little poster on it. Okay. So we launch Mocha, and when it starts, you'll probably get a lot of windows asking you to register and check out training manuals. You can just click close, and you may, when you open it for the first time, be looking at this interface. Now, the first thing that you want to do if it's your first time using Mocha is to switch the workspace from Classic to Essentials. What that gives you is a simplified interface with only the very necessary tools to do a basic planar track. We will be using the classic layout when we get to the more intermediate and advanced kinds of motion tracking. Mocha's interface, when you're in Essentials, is pretty straightforward. At the top, you have some tools, you have your save, and you have a couple of Mocha-specific things here that we're going to get to shortly that assist and aid you in doing very accurate tracking. And here you'll see some familiar looking pen tool icons, hands for panning, and so on. Now, these are all much the same as what you would do in After Effects with some slight differences that we'll look at. Down here we have a layer section. Layers in Mocha doesn't correspond to different layers of videos or graphics. It corresponds to layers being tracks. And we'll see one appear in a moment when we create our first tracking shape. Down here we have the options for our tracking. Again, some of them are pretty straightforward. Do we want to track movement, scale, rotation, skewing, or perspective, or do we want to track a number of different ones? And that will depend on your plate. So this one, for example, has a clear change in perspective, so we're going to need to have perspective selected. Down here we just have our tracking, okay, and that's pretty straightforward. We track forwards, we stop, we track backwards. So to get a simple corner pin effect, we're going to pretend to put a poster on this wall. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to designate an area of the wall that I want to track. Now, when you're creating a four corner pin using planar tracking, you don't need to identify the exact points on the wall where the poster are going to be when you're doing your tracking. What you want instead is to track as much of the plane, in this case the wall, that the poster is going to go onto that you can, so that it has as much planar data in here to work with when it places the four corner pin effect in the middle. So we're just looking for what's called coplanarity, or a plane that is the same plane that the object is going to sit on, in this case the wall. Now you can also line it up roughly with the geometry of the wall if you can here. I can see some brickwork, some ground footpath and stuff here, and I can use that. So this is what's going to be doing the tracking. This is like the thing that analyzes, finds the plane, tracks it, and captures that data so we can apply it later on. The S here gives us our surface. This is the object that is going to determine where the poster is going to go. So in this case, I'm going to make it relatively small. You can line it up this way by eye, but what you really want to do is to use the grid. So the planar grid maps a big pink grid to this object. Now, what you're looking to do here is line up the corners by referencing where the grid lines up with and overlaps with geometry in your scene. In this case, we have loads. We've got the door frame, we've got the bottom of the wall, we've got the window, and so on. So you're clicking and dragging this around and you're trying to make the geometry of your grid match the geometry of the plate. And when it does, your plane is going to, or your surface is going to be perfectly in the geometry of the wall here. So you can click and drag, but if you hold down Shift and Control and click and drag, it will slow it down and will give you much more accuracy. So I'm trying to get that to match the window down here. I'm trying to get that bottom grid to match the line of the wall, the bottom of the wall. Up here, I'm trying to, that's already perfectly lined up there, so I don't need to do much. This is lining up nicely with the footpath. This is lining up nicely with the window. So this is actually, I kind of accidentally did it accurately to begin with, okay? But that's how you do it. You line up these 4 points, but you're keeping an eye on the pink grid to make sure that they line up with everything else, and then the surface will be used. So you don't have to line up the surface first, but it helps just to kind of get a good idea of where it's going to be. But once you have it lined up, you check your essentials here, your properties that you're tracking. In this case, perspective needs to be switched on, and then I can click track forward. Now this will take a minute or two to do. Oh, it's actually relatively fast. So planar can be a little bit slow if you're working with 4K clips upwards because there's a lot of pixel data being sampled and followed. Now, what you'll notice here when it tracks to the left, it actually goes partially off screen. Now, that's one of the handy things about planar tracking in that it'll use this information here, even if this part of the track, and you can see the shape has gone off to the left, but it doesn't matter because it has enough data left over in our tracking shape to work. It's just getting to the end here. And when this gets to the end, I'll bring it back to this little green keyframe symbol here, because that's where I did my initial setting up. And I'll now track backwards. Oops, no, I didn't. I played it backwards there because I clicked the wrong button. These look exactly like these, which can be a little bit confusing. Okay, so this is done. I can drag the playhead through that now and see if I get a nice track. Looks like it's lined up nicely. Now you can spend a bit of time here. You can play it backwards and forwards and so on, but I'm not going to labor too much on it now because I want to get the data I have back into After Effects. So all I need to do is save the file. Now you don't need to worry about where it is. It's saved internally in After Effects as directories. So we go back out to After Effects and we now have the option in our tracking data to create the tracking data. Now all this is going to do is it's going to open up a tab and it's going to ask us to name the layer we want to take the tracking data from. We just had one layer, that shape that I created initially. I should have named it really, wall track or something like that. But I click OK and you'll see it populates the 4 corner pins here and it just needs content now to be pinned to it. Now, this is where you need to use the quick workaround to create a composition the size of the, as solid the size of the composition, and then pre-comp that. Call this poster, and in here, I'm going to get my poster, just bring it in, and I'm going to transform fit to comp so that when I set my tracking data, I want to take the data, export it to my poster layer, and then apply export. You'll see that that nicely lines up now with the movement of the wall. It's a very robust, smooth way of tracking. And that is essentially a simple planar track using the data to generate a corner pin. Now I'll do the masking in a separate video.